a whisper campaign to grow your business. You know I'm talking about referral marketing today with special guest Ian Campbell on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Book Arbitrage Profits. If you want to start the ultimate side hustle, I can't recommend book flipping enough. Used books are continually going up in value. If you want to learn how to flip books and make 6 and even 7 figures, please join our free training at servetomaster.com/BAPS.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master Podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
Now, this is a topic near and dear to my heart because it's how I initially grew my business and my online business. But I know a lot of people have some misperceptions. And I think a really common thing that when I talk to people about referral marketing is they think it's aggressive, that it's trying to tap into the well twice, like asking existing, hey, you're already a customer, but can you also send me more customers? And that with that perception, it feels a little bit icky, right? Like you're asking. And I think that comes from a mindset of that what I do isn't as valuable as what it costs. What do you think? Where does that mindset start from? And of course, then you can tell me how you got into referral marketing. I'd love to hear the beginning of your journey and your story.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny that you bring up the kind of icky feeling of it, because I remember I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's in business, and he brought up these stats, and I'm going to completely mix up the numbers, right? So don't think that these numbers are specific, but something like 85% of customers would be willing to give a referral if asked, but only 7% of salespeople or business owners are willing to ask for referrals, right? So there's a lot of head trash that goes around that. And I think that does come from a lot of just insecurities and fear around what people are going to think about us, right? And it does lead into a lot of my own journey as far as referrals are concerned and kind of building a business based on referrals. I started my company when I was way too young and stupid to know that I was completely unqualified doing what I was doing. So I had to go based on referrals because I didn't have the credentials to do so. I just had to do good work for people and then rely on the fact that they would be willing to introduce me to somebody else if I did a good job for them. And so as I grew and developed my business, and it was a marketing consulting company back in the day, I kind of built that way. And kind of like you were mentioning, that's where a lot of my work came from early on. But then as time went by, I started to realize the power of a really good referral network as well, right? So you've got a couple different ways to develop referrals. And one of those obviously is with customers, but then the other part is with other professionals that you can make connections with and whatnot. And it's important to remember that, again, people are willing to refer you business. 9 times out of 10, you just have to ask. You got to get past that head trash. And once you do, it starts to become like anything else, right? It starts to become easier, and then you do it again, it becomes a little bit easier still, so on and so forth.
I think a lot of it has to do with what you think you're asking for and how you ask. Like I get asked for referrals and references or testimonials all the time, but maybe once or twice a month by people that have the confidence to do it. Not as many people as probably should. And I often go the extra mile and I'll shoot the video and all that stuff. But the more I like something, the more effort I'll put in because I know how much it means to the person, how much of a difference it can make. And some of those have actually led to more business for me because the person appreciates it so much. I think a lot of the idea comes from some of the more aggressive referral marketing. Like I'm used to, when I did referral marketing, my first thought is like when someone says, hey, can you think of 3 people that might be a good fit for my business? Sure. Can you email all 3 of them right now?
Right.
That part I don't like. That's the part that I think we all think of as referral marketing. And I think there's a spectrum. The main way, like when I get referrals, almost all of my like high level clients are referrals. I don't mention coaching or ghostwriting anywhere on my website. You can only get me for either of those services by emailing me and saying, hey, I heard you do ghostwriting. That's how it starts. And so it's only through referrals, people I've already worked with in the past. And the way I got out there is I just told everyone that I'm a really good ghostwriter. And most people don't know other ghostwriters. So if you use a term that's not really out there, then you can do really well. And I learned this from my uncle. He went to England and he was a hairstylist, but he had a cosmetology license, which is not the word they use in England. So he would tell everyone he's a cosmetologist, and they're like, whoa, he must be a real expert. It's just the name in England wouldn't. So they would run these ads to see if he was stealing a job from an English person. No one would apply because no one in England has a cosmetology license because they use a different name for it. And that he built an entire business just on understanding the power of using the right name. So it can be as simple as defining your expertise and then letting everyone know what you do, all the way up to that aggressive end of the market where you say, hey, can you send 3 referrals? Or even those chain letters. I remember you get a chain letter that said, and bad things will happen to you unless you photocopy this letter 10 times and send it to 10 people. I think that's the original of referral marketing. And so where on the spectrum do you lie? And how can someone find, I guess, like the comfort that they're okay with, where they can be on the spectrum? Because most people I know, especially writers I train, don't want to tell anyone they're a writer until they have clients. And it's like, well, you're not going to get any clients. You don't tell anyone you're right? Like it's a circle. So where on the spectrum should people be and how can they find their comfort zone?
Yeah, especially with people getting started or starting to build their business, I find that falling somewhere in the middle of that is usually your best bet, right? Because, there's a couple of things that come to mind here. First of all, you never get what you don't ask for, right? So telling people what you are, what you're doing, and, what you're doing out in the marketplace, of course, is hugely important. But then it is important for you to ask other people, hey, who do you know that needs this kind of service? Who do you know that fits this kind of profile? And I think there's an idea of understanding first of all, your ideal client, right? Knowing who the people that you want to be working for are, and being able to really define those folks, right? Because without that, you're never going to be able to understand who you're going after and who you should be talking to in the first place. But then beyond that, understanding your ideal referral partner, understanding ideally who those people are that can refer people, right? For writers, for example, you're going to be talking to marketing agencies, talking to videographers and people like that. There's a natural fit there because there's kind of a quick and easy handshake pass off that can be done. And so if you can identify that ideal referral partner, then you can ultimately, it becomes a lot easier to ask. And you don't have to say, hey, who are 3 people that can use my services? It's just maintaining a relationship and saying, oh, hey, by the way, I'm looking for more introductions to people who own, I don't know, dog food businesses, right? And then next to that person that's on the other side of the table or on the other side of the Zoom screen, for example, is working with plenty of those folks. And they say, oh yeah, you know what? You've always done good work for me. So I've actually got a couple of names and saying, hey, do you mind making an introduction? It's proactive, but not aggressive. Right. And so you're able to be proactive and to actually say, hey, let's do this. And if you could, you're still taking responsibility for your business, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But you're not being so pushy, like you're sitting down and saying, okay, here are 5 names that you wrote down. Let's have a conversation about those 5 people. And when can you introduce me? Well, back off, pal. That's a little awkward. I'm not going to do that. Whereas if you just say, oh yeah, do you mind making an introduction? Then I'm a lot more likely to do so. Falling somewhere in the middle, because ultimately you're going to get to that point to where you are, where you're able to say, people are going to refer me. And I know that people are going to refer me business. They're going to send people my name. They're going to reach out to me and I'm going to start getting emails saying, hey, I heard you do ghostwriting, or hey, I heard you do this. I heard you do that. And so if you can keep pushing that forward, keep pushing those referral relationships forward, you're going to start getting those emails a lot more passively. And then you can start building your business in other ways too.
Well, what do you do if someone says they're going to do that and then they don't, right? They go, oh yeah, I know somebody perfect for you. And then they never send the email. I think that's the second dip where people get super uncomfortable. And I know that, and I put this in a lot of my trainings and say, if you're asking me and I don't reply, just ask again, because it means I forgot. And 90% of the time, I remember I hired someone years and years ago after the 13th time she emailed me. And I was like, oh yeah, I meant to hire you for this job. I think you'd be a perfect fit. And then worked together for a couple of years. And recently someone wanted a referral who'd worked with me for years, another employee. And I kept forgetting until she reminded me. She could have been more aggressive. She kept reminding me she wanted a video and she kept asking at a time when I couldn't shoot a video, right? It was like wrong time of day. Like, she wanted outdoor video or indoor. I forget what it was, but it was like, oh, it's at night and she wants a daytime video or vice versa. And so it's oftentimes people think that they're being annoying and they can't find the spectrum. Like for cold emails, I know after 3 emails, if I don't reply because I've never heard of you, that's when you can stop. But if I've already said yes and I keep forgetting, that's different. So how does someone find that balance between asking enough to get what you want and not asking so much that they now hate you.
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, if you can get somebody to stop writing you cold emails after 3, then, you're more talented than I am. That's a pretty impressive thing. Usually I get 15 or 12 to 15 or 20 of them. But as far when it comes to those referrals, I think that holding people accountable to what they've told you that they were going to do is an important thing, right? It's an important thing in business. I want to be held accountable. And to your point, I want to, if I tell you that I'm going to do something and I don't do it, it's not because I don't want to do it, but I want to hold to my word. I want to follow through on it. But like you said, sometimes things just go awry. And I get probably 75, 100 emails every day. Right. And there's some sort of a fire to be put out. There's something happening, and I've got my team that I work with. And so these people need something, not that person needs something. So there's always something else going on. Right. But at the end of the day, if I tell you that I'm going to do something, then I better do it. And I think that's okay to hold people to that standard because, and then and frankly, if they're not going to do it, make them tell you that they're not going to do it, right? There's that idea of polite persistence where you can, again, once somebody's told you, yes, that this is something that I want to do, or this is something that I'm willing to do for you, just tapping them on the shoulder every now and then, right? Don't do it daily. Don't do it. I'd say keep it to a week, keep it to once every 2 weeks, whatever. But just kind of, you've earned the right to do so. If you've had the guts to ask and they've told you yes, then they've given you permission, in my opinion anyway, they've given you permission to follow up and to make sure that they actually follow through.
I think there's a tendency to attach the assumption of enemy action to a passive action. For example, if you email someone and they don't reply, or if this is a really common one. If you have a mailing list like I do and someone unsubscribes, your first thought is, oh my gosh, they hate, right? It's an emotional reaction. Like the reason they stopped wanting to read my emails is because they've judged me as a human being and found me wanting. And 99% of the time is that they've just moved on to some other interest, or they've forgotten, or they're decluttering their inbox. 99% of the time when I'm unsubscribing from mailing lists, I'm doing it all in the same day. It's either me or an app doing it and I'm cleaning up. I'm like, oh, I just don't need these emails anymore. I'm doing something else, or I found a different hobby, or I've decided that I'm going to go in a different direction. And it's very rarely about the actual person. It's very rarely a dislike. Mostly it's a disinterest or moved on, or it's about the other person, right? Oh, I need to stop getting so many of these emails, right? I'll clean up some of them. But we think this person hates me. They've rejected me on the core level as a human being. And I think that we so often, right, throughout this entire process, if you're asking for a referral, trying to get a client, and because there's this period as well, right, when they send the introduction email and you're like, well, should I respond first or wait for the other person to respond, right? And it reminds me of like, when I was in high school, there was this rule of like, oh, if you get a girl's phone number, you don't call for 3 days, right? But then there was these rules, right, of like who texts first or who texts the longest. And I'm sure they've all changed. I've been married for a long time, but I remember used to look at like how many when it was texting, whoever wrote the most letters in the text likes the other person more. So if you write the and she writes on, that means you like her more because you wrote 3 letters, she wrote 2. And I know because I do this with client work, especially when it's a big number client, that I'm starting going, oh my gosh, my email's longer than theirs. Maybe I like them more than they like me. And you recreate that same feeling of being 14 and not knowing what to do. How can someone, like, how do you navigate those emotional waters where it's a client, you start to really want the client? Like in my head, sometimes I already start to spend the money before I've even gotten the reply from the client. Like, do you reply first or do you wait for the other person to reply? How does that go?
Yeah. I think there's a level of imposter syndrome that we all deal with. Right. And it does harken back to that idea of being in high school again and just not knowing exactly where you belong. And I think especially when it comes to being a business owner, there's that constant question of, or an entrepreneur or whatever, a service provider, that there's that constant question of, am I good enough to be doing what I'm doing? Right. Should I be here? Should I have a seat at the table? Yes or no? Right. And circle one, yes or no? And I think that that's something that we all deal with to some extent. And so I think in addition to Mission Suite and to my business, I'm a musician, right? I'm a performing musician. And so talk about imposter syndrome. There's, I can't count the number of times that I've been playing at a place somewhere and I've seen somebody get up and walk away and thought to myself, oh my God, it's because I'm horrible, right? Never mind the 200 people that are still sitting in front of me, engaged and looking at me. one person walked away, and now all of a sudden that means that I shouldn't be up on stage. Right. So those types of things are definitely things that we all struggle with. And I think that, again, it comes down to, a lot of it for me anyway, comes down to just saying, you know what? I just got to do it. I don't know if I'm going to be here, but if I'm supposed to be here, but I'm never going to figure it out unless I show up. And if I'm not supposed to be here, someone's going to tell me. To answer your question about like when you get those referral emails and, who to respond first and whatnot, I always take the lead. I always take the lead every single time. Right. And it doesn't have to be gushy. It doesn't have to be like, it's not super, hey, this is what I do. You want to hire me kind of a deal, but rather it's, hey, great to meet you. Or thanks so much for the introduction, Joe. I appreciate that. Sam, it's great to meet you. Love to get together and chat more about what you're doing and see if there's any sort of value that I can add to a relationship. Do you have time for a 15-minute, 20-minute phone call? I'm available Thursday at 3 and Friday at 2, right? And so let me know if one of those things looks good for you. And then it kind of takes away that. And then, of course, following up after that, which is also very important because, again, like we said before, the referral to the people who said they send you referrals are busy, and the people who they referred you to are also busy. So making sure that you're following up, making sure that you're touching base and whatnot is also really important. So, but just putting yourself out there and making sure and always taking the lead, because again, this is your business, not theirs. So you've got to be the one to own it, right? You've got to be the one to own the relationship and start moving and start driving it forward.
Now, the process, once you start doing this, it can become cumbersome to remember who sent which lead, who referred which person, or where they came from. My biggest issue, the reason I respond quickly is because I will forget. I pre-warn people a lot of the time that I'm very forgetful. And I use a special tool that I started using about 2 years ago called a personal CRM to help me remember who people are. So after this phone call, I will go into that, write down what we talked about, put in a copy of your picture and like your email address and information to help me remember who you are. And it's not personal. I do it for everyone. When I first dated my wife, for the first year we were dating, sometimes I would go out with the boys and then she would come and meet me and I would text her, raise your hand. So I know which one you are, because that's me. Now, I don't have full face blindness like one of my friends had, but it's sometimes hard for me to remember who's who. And I've definitely walked up to the wrong woman and she's like, that's your wife over there. Doesn't happen as much anymore, but it happened in the early days. And so that forgetfulness becomes like, that's the main reason that I lose leads or clients, is that I forget them. And so I use this for my personal life as well as my business. Just remember who people are. Like, what did we talk about? What did this person say? What's this person's interest? Someone the other day, I was talking to him in a meeting I'm doing a big project with, and he started talking about his like 3 biggest hobbies. And I was like, I better write this down because I will forget. I used to be able to remember when my network was smaller, when I was starting out 12 or 13 years ago, and I only needed to know about 20 or 50 people. Now that I've met thousands, I will forget that stuff. And I know that's what you help people do. And that's what I wanted to get to is people lose a lot of business in these key moments, which is I'm afraid to ask for a referral. I'm afraid to respond to the referral. I forgot about the referral. That's my biggest area. I've had clients, someone emailed me maybe a couple of years ago and said, Jonathan, I love the book you wrote for me. I have an amazing client for you. Here's an introduction. My first thought was, I have no idea who you are. And I did a massive $10,000 or $20,000 project for the person, and I could not tell you. And they even linked to their book. And I was like, oh, I wrote this? Like that.
Yeah, right.
That's how bad I am. It's not just like a stranger, it's like people who paid me a lot of money, and I haven't done that many ghostwriting clients. So that's where I'm at. So I really need a tool to help me. And a lot of people, when they think about a CRM tool, they think about Salesforce, which is very, very, very complicated. And it's for people that are doing 50 sales calls a day and they're in that type of business. But for someone who's doing maybe even 5 or less referrals a week or even per month, they think, oh, why would I need to keep track of that? So maybe we can start there. So I do want to dig into your tool. Where does forgetfulness begin in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, it varies for everybody, right? But I think that from the time that we hit send on an email or the time that we hang up the phone and whatnot, 9 times out of 10, we're already moved on to something else in our head, right? And so it's important to have some sort of a system to make sure that you're following up on everything, right? Because I mean, and I'm sure that everybody's heard the fortune is in the follow-up. The fortune is in the follow-up, right? And everything that you earn, all the money that you make is probably going to come from following up in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And as a result of that, it's important to have some sort of a system, whatever it is for you. Of course, Mission Suite is a CRM and it is a system like that. The beauty of in my perspective of it, the beauty of it is that we're able to automate a lot of those things so we can create kind of campaigns. Because I'm very similar to you that if I have a definitely time remembering people's names, right? And so there are so many times when we all moved to Zoom during the pandemic, one of the kind of silver linings for me was that no matter who I was talking to, their name was in the corner of the screen, right? There were times when somebody would have his wife's name was using his wife's Zoom account, which made things complicated. But, that was really, things like that were really helpful for me because it was a system that I was able to latch onto. And so with what we do with Mission Suite is we automate a lot of that stuff because I find that getting ourselves out of our own way and putting that automation into place helps in a way because we're not thinking about it anymore. And the machine, the computer, the algorithm, whatever you've created inside the system, it doesn't care if you're insecure. It doesn't care if you're not sure if you should be touching base with this person again. You make a determination. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to send an email. 3 days later, I'm going to follow up on it. 3 days later, I'm going to follow up on that. 5 days after that, I'm going to follow up again, right? You're creating that kind of a system and the machine is going to do that no matter what. And so it becomes really helpful. And of course, you want to monitor it to make sure that things need to be tweaked, to see what needs to be tweaked along the way. But it becomes really helpful because people actually do respond to that. And that's how you can, I think, migrate from that level of forgetfulness of I've forgotten who you are and what you're doing to to being able to be responsive and to really leverage the tools that you need to remember a person's name because it just happens to be sitting in the bottom left corner of their picture.
Yeah. When doing outreach and some of our processes, we send out cold emails to people we want to partner with. If I want to have someone on the podcast or I want to have someone work on a book project together, and I write 3 emails at once and then I send them, basically they're queued up. The person responds to the first email, then they don't get the other 2, but then the next one comes out 3 days, the next one 3 days later. And that's the automation that we do. And there are tools that do that, right? There are like some Gmail add-ons that do things like that or remind you to send a follow-up letter to say, hey, did this person reply? And I find those way more helpful than I thought because I forget that if someone replied or not all the time. Like I never wanted to use a project management tool until I realized how much more money I made when I started organizing stuff because I forget projects all the time.
Sure.
I have a calendar that tells me what I'm supposed to do every week, which is like so powerful for me. So it's really significant. I think that a lot of entrepreneurs starting out think, oh, I don't need to do any of that. But then when you try to hire someone or scale, you have no system. So I've realized how important project management is. And CRM for me has always been a challenge because we have one place where we do our financial transactions. We have our shopping cart, or maybe we have delivery, our content delivery, our membership side, or our service deliveries, and integrating all those things has always been really challenging. And there are so many CRMs out there. There's so many, and all the time, I can never find one that kind of meets my need, that understands how I do business, because only a small percentage of my business is referral. And a lot of them are only designed for that. So when I was looking for a tool for me, I was like, well, I'm not lead scoring. Like I'm not lead scoring you right now, right?
Right.
You're not a potential client. You're in a different category. And a lot of CRMs, that's why I have a personal CRM, only offer that solution. I'm like, no, I just want to remember who someone is. And if we talk about doing, like afterwards, you might say, oh, Jonathan, would you ever do this kind of project? I want to write that down. So when I email you in a month or something, I don't forget, right? But I'm not trying to close a deal. Whereas then someone reaches out to me or someone says, oh, this person might be a cool client. They're in a different category. And then I am basically looking at, are they really looking to work with someone like me? Is this an hour or later problem? Should I follow up in 6 months or do you want to take action right now? Those things are very, very real. So those are the kinds of things that I sometimes struggle with. It's like, I don't really want to run 2 CRMs for me, right? I'm a smaller business. I don't have enough employees to need to have them all have their own dashboard. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that because I am interested in your process, right? For because I know you talk about entrepreneurs. And so someone who's starting off as a solopreneur, right? That's a new term. So
Yeah.
tell me how you deal with those processes and someone who's figuring out what's the right CRM for them. Because honestly, there are so many, it's so overwhelming.
Right. For sure. The big thing with, first of all, as far as there's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of solopreneurs out there that are just kicking off and getting started, to your point, that think to themselves, I don't need this right now because I can manage everything in a spreadsheet. I can do whatever, right? I mean, there is a lot of that. And I've talked to a lot of people and have come to realize that as far as Mission Suite goes, our biggest competitor is Microsoft Excel, right? Not Salesforce, not HubSpot, although those are obviously the big gorillas, but our biggest competitor is Microsoft Excel because people get so kind of locked into that, but you can't scale with it. More importantly, even for yourself, you can't create systems out of it. And so using those types of tools, using like a CRM, for example, is important because you can create yourself a system. And it's important to do those things even for yourself as you're creating that, kind of like we talked about before. As far as what to look for in a CRM when you are making those decisions and deciding, well, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? I'm a big believer that, first of all, your CRM can be your own personal sales assistant if you are using the right one, right? It can automatically send follow-up emails. You can give it the information that you need the CRM to have or your quote assistant to have, and then it'll send out a follow-up email for you on your behalf. That's coming from your name. It'll remind you, hey, you got to call this person here on Tuesday, whatever, those types of things. So finding one that can do that, finding one that has that kind of automation, that's not going to cost an arm and a leg is really, really important. But beyond that, even more important is find something that has the level of service and support and training that you're going to need, right? Because the biggest reason that people stop using CRMs is because they don't see the value of it. They're not able to identify why I should be using this thing. And most often that's because they never were taught, they never actually learned how to use it for what they needed to do. Right. I mean, we've mentioned a couple competitors here, and they have forums and they've got community groups and they've got chat bots and things like that. And, those are all well and good and they serve a valuable purpose. But at the end of the day, a lot of times you just need to talk to somebody to say, listen, I need the system to do XYZ for me. Can you show me how to make it do that? So finding something that's going to do that, finding a system that has a team that will do that for you is probably the biggest thing in your search. And again, everybody's needs going to be different here. There's going to be some people that only need a community forum, that only need a chatbot, and that's fine. There's going to be other people that need full on training and Zoom training and whatnot. And so kind of figure out where you're going to fall, because if you don't know how to use the system and you can't figure out how to do it well, then you're never going to get value out of it. And at the end of the day, the only reason that you keep paying people that own companies like mine is because you found out you get value out of it. Otherwise, there's no point to it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because everyone has different use cases. So like when I think of a chatbot and forums and like all that effort to learn something, that's like what I don't want. What I like, my personal CRM, which is not what I use for business, just to remember people. It's really small. And when I email the founder, he might be a one guy operation. I might be his only customer, but like he's the one who responds and does what I want. But like the most important features to me, I was thinking about this. The most important feature to me is profile merge, because I often put people in twice. I put 4 people in twice this weekend. That's why it's on my mind. And I was like, oh my gosh, does this have a profile merge? And then I went back, I forgot. And then I go to the dashboard and it's like the first button. I was like, this one gets me. So I think there is a real personal element to it. Is like, that's not something not everyone has that problem, right? That's like not the most common problem. That's for me. And the second thing that really I value is when you can put in all the person's social media channels and it will just put that information in one place and automatically put in a picture. Because it's such an extra effort for me to download a picture from someone's website, upload it to the thing. And my tool only will pull in the profile picture from LinkedIn. I'm like, I wish you would also do it from Facebook, because not everyone uses only LinkedIn, right? But at least it does it from one, right? And it pulls in the LinkedIn profile, because I guess it thinks that's the most important one. It's probably the most accurate for most people, right? They're bio LinkedIn more accurate than Facebook or certainly Pinterest. But those are the things that really matter to me. And those are both two forms of automation, or the ability to import a spreadsheet, right? When I have old information in spreadsheets, the more I can import those and categorize people, because we ran on spreadsheets for our outreach for years and years and years, and manually importing people is such an effort. So I do wish it was a higher level where it would try and use their email address to find their LinkedIn profile and pull in, but my tool doesn't do that yet. It's really just a memory booster. It's not meant for the higher level stuff. But when you're designing the automation, right, there's a thing where it can be too automated and people get annoyed at that end, or it can be not enough. I know that when you're trying to figure out your consumer, this is a challenge that interests me very much. How do you choose that balance so that people don't go, oh, wait, that's way too much. Like, you imported all my Facebook friends, because I certainly am not really friends with all my Facebook friends, right?
Yeah, right.
Balance, right? It's the same thing where your tablet is like, you can update every app at once or one by one and go through 100 decisions. It's like, there's no in between. So that's what I'm really curious about, how you find that balance for your customers.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes down to individual needs, right? Because to your point, everyone, not everyone's going to use Facebook. Not everyone's going to need 5 automated emails to go out and whatnot. So, but there are tools, there are ways that we can develop that to determine what is actually necessary in your automation strategy, right? And that a lot of times comes down to, first of all, any automation starts on a whiteboard or a piece of paper. It doesn't start inside of a computer, right? So sitting down and saying whether it's, I love whiteboards. I love Post-it notes, right? But I mean, taking those things going analog, if you will, and taking those things and saying, okay, so first I want, in this specific case, it's a LinkedIn connection, or it's somebody that I'm at a networking event, or it's a customer referral, or whatever the case may be. Here's where we're starting. And then this is what happens next. And this is what happens next. And if this happens, I don't want this, right? So, but having that kind of that strategy laid out in a very analog format, it becomes really beneficial. And what I like to tell people is, first of all, assume that when you first do this, assume that nobody responds to you, right? Assume that you're writing all of your automation with nobody responding to you. And then once you develop that, then say, okay, now if they respond after the first email, what do you want to have happen? If they respond after not after the first email, but after the first phone call, what happens then? Right. And then start creating your branches off of that. And you'll find that it's one of those weird horizontal family tree kind of a thing, where you'll start to be able to create what that actually looks like and build it out in a way that makes sense to you. And then you can apply that to your system. Now, then it becomes important just to make sure that your system can actually, conform to you and to your automation needs, and is not forcing you into their own. But most systems out there that are worth their salt will allow you to take whatever strategy you lay out and then build it out inside of their system so that it works effectively for you.
I think that's really good, because a lot of people come from the other mindset of like, oh, I only need to plan one thing because every deal is going to come through. Like, I go to 1 to 2 conferences a year. I live on a small island in the middle of nowhere. So when I go to a conference, I do all my deals for the year. And I've learned that if 10 deals get me really excited, I want to call my wife about them, one of them will happen. And there's this mistake people make early on. They go, oh, I have one really good deal. Someone said they want to do a project with me. It's on, right? And they're so into it. They don't realize, no, you got a 10%, because we're all meeting tons of people, and that's in a compressed environment. In the same way, it is important to put things for fair. I'm very analog. I write everything down on note cards, and then all my notes, all the things I have to work on today, I can see 4 or 5 note cards of stuff written on projects for the week.
Sure.
Because I do struggle to put everything into my project management. I wish I was really good like that. Some people are so good at having that dashboard. That's not me. But for big projects and tracking, I can do it there, mostly if other people are doing this stuff. So I think what you're saying is very interesting, because people have different pain points, or the part that they stink at. Some people just stink at the planning. Some people are way too optimistic. Some people are way too pessimistic. So I'm always interested when talking to a software creator, because you have to deal with very, very different personality types and how they approach data and how they approach their planning. So when you talk about, like, I write out, anytime I'm writing out an automation, I do write it out in a notebook. I draw it out by hand 2 or 3 times. And that's really how I plan how I want something to happen. I have to look at it and then I can move. If I'm doing it on a board, I don't always do that. I wish I was better. I can move the cards around on a board. I don't always do that. Like, I want to be like Minority Report, but that's really hard to do. Like, when I think about what I would want from this type of tool is kind of like, the president has someone who stands behind that reminds him who every person is, like, oh, this is a senator from so-and-so. You kind of hate them. Oh yeah. Like, I don't even remember that stuff. Like, I struggle to remember, like, oh, I don't like that person unless I write it down. So that's kind of like the dream, right? For a tool like yours, is to remind you who someone is, what you wanted to do, and then even do a little bit on your behalf. I think the automated email thing is very, very interesting because it overcomes the, how long should I wait to email, right? Like you mentioned earlier, like that school note, do you like me? Yes, no, maybe. Because when we attach emotion, I think that's when referral stuff gets the trickiest. If it's, this person doesn't want to work with me because they don't like me, right? And it can't be, oh, they just had a financial hit, right? Like a medical emergency, and that's why they can't do right? Like, I had someone who called me up, wanted to do a huge project. I gave them the number. They said, great. Let me put it together. Never responded. 2 months later, call me again. Same conversation. Just have a few last questions. I definitely want to work with you. I'll send you the money tomorrow. Ghosted me again. And I don't think it's personal, right? No. I think it's probably about the number more than about me, but we get in there. And that's another area where I'm very interested. If someone pre-automates the emails, then they can put in like what the price is, because most people negotiate against themselves, right? Maybe you've even been there, right? Where you're talking to a client, you say a number, you go, it's $10,000, and they don't say anything. You go, actually, I mean, it's 8. What about moments like, what am I doing here? What's happening, right? And then you go, like, they didn't even say anything. Like, that's the first negotiating I rule was like, once you say a number, be quiet as long as you can. Like, let them talk next or you'll lose. But that's such a common struggle for a young entrepreneur or someone who's new to entrepreneurship, right? Is that the price conversation is really, really, really hard, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing a project right now for a very high number, but I did a 2-for-1, right? And then as I'm working on the project, like, oh yeah, we made $57 million on our last project. I'm like, why did I give you guys, I should have been a 2-for-2. Like, why did I even think about that, right? It's like a big number for me. It's a great number for me, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I should have got bigger. And that, even at my level, right, I'm still like, oh, I should have gone for the next number, right? Like, gone a little bit bigger. I still got what I wanted, but I could have gone twice as big if I'd realized. So it never stops happening. I don't think it ever stops happening where that's in place. And how could someone maybe integrate that part of the process, the negotiating part, into the automation so that they don't have to sit down and nervously say, am I going to ask for a number that's too high?
Right. So much of that comes from the qualification process, those qualification conversations early on, right? So when, to your point, just a quick story, I had a sales trainer who told me a story one time. He's like, my first sales job that I had, he had a sales manager go out with him, and he sat down and realized that the sales manager realized that he was negotiating against himself, like he said. And he basically said, okay, listen to me. Next time we sit down and you quote a number, if you talk before they do, you're fired. And I mean, talk about a way to get in his head, right? The guy shut up. He stayed quiet, and all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I'll take it. That's fine. Fantastic. Right. So you want there to be a little bit of tension in that conversation, because that's when you find that you're being paid for your value, and that but you're not going too far for them. Right. But more specifically to your question about how to manage that inside of a CRM, what I've done a lot of times in the past for certain clients is I set up, because everyone has their series of conversations, right? Conversation 1, I need to get this information. Conversation 2, need to get this information. And that's the qualification process. And so what we've done is I've set up little clusters inside of the CRM to say, okay, meeting 1, this is the information that you need, right? What are they expecting to get out of the project, right? To your point, yeah, we made $57 million on our last project. Okay, so you can afford to spend a bit of money, right? And what's going to happen with this? What are your intentions for this? All of this information that you collect over time is going to give you that kind of final number that you feel comfortable presenting to them. And so if you can get that information and store it back in the CRM, then there's a couple different things that you could do, potential things that you could do. First of all, there are ways that you can build algorithms inside of your CRM. This goes into CRM Geek 303 kind of a thing, but you can build those things out so that each value has a number associated with it, blah, 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 blah. And then you can create this hourly rate or kind of per unit rate type of a deal that ultimately is hard coded into the system. So that when the email goes out to follow up on the pricing, then you're able to, it's just in there, right? Because you can personalize those emails, those automated emails, and drop that information in. So that's one way to do it. But more commonly, what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to look back at that information and say, oh, okay, so Sam here said that he's got all that these are the things that he's expecting out of this project. That means that my pricing is fair at this point. And fair pricing is what we all want at the end of the day, right? Everybody presumably wants us to be paid fairly. They want to get a fair price in return. And so having all that information and really going through the qualification process effectively is oftentimes the best and most effective way to get over that hump in your head, that mental hurdle.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because there's all these different areas where when we're trying to build a business, we don't realize we have to do the marketing, the sales, and the follow-up. And I think that's very interesting. So let's say I am talking to someone, I realize, oh, they're not ready right now. They want me to follow up in 2 months. Can you write that email now and have it set to go out in 2 months? Or do you have to set it in your tool and then you get a reminder in 2 months?
No, you can absolutely, in our tool specifically, you can absolutely set it for that 2 months. And so you can, there's a couple different ways you can do that. And it depends on what you want your follow-up to look like. If it's just wait 2 months and then send an email, then you can pre-schedule an email. If it's follow up on this day and then a week later, they're going to get this interesting article, or a month later, they're going to get this kind of sample of our work, or whatever the case may be, just to keep nurturing that to that client. There's ways you can do both.
And that's pretty interesting. So who's your ideal customer for the Mission Suite, which is the name of your tool?
Yeah. So our ideal client is really the consultants, the entrepreneurs, the kind of small teams potentially who are getting going and are trying to grow, right? I talked about training before, and our biggest asset and our biggest kind of service offering is that we provide training at no additional cost to anybody that's using the system. So we love working I was a consultant for a long time, so I feel that struggle. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. I feel that struggle really, really, really sharply. And so I love working with people like that to help them grow and to help them figure out what to do next. I think that there's so much opportunity, and a good CRM can be such a great force multiplier for a one-man band or for a 3-person team. You can use a CRM and effectively triple or quadruple the effectiveness of your team by using a good CRM. And our team at Mission Suite loves to actually work together on training sessions to show people exactly how to do that.
I think that's really cool because that's also important is when one person talks to the potential customer and then someone else is picking up the conversation. I have had the problem where someone's like, yeah, I want to do exactly what you promised. I'm like, oh boy, I don't remember what I promised or the price. Like that's happened.
Yeah, right.
So this is very, very cool. So guys, definitely go to themissionsuite.com and they've got something cool to check out at themissionsuite.com/CRM-4-entrepreneurs. It's really been great. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time, Ian. Thank you. I really think it's been cool to have you here today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure to subscribe so that together we can achieve true freedom.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next week with more tips and tactics on how to escape the rat race. Please take a moment to leave a review at servenomaster.com/iTunes. It helps the show grow, and more listeners means more content for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.